I want to talk about two painters today who I think get completely overlooked, Vuillard and Bonnard. Most people who follow art history know the big names from that period, Monet, Cézanne, Gauguin, maybe Matisse, but Vuillard and Bonnard tend to get pushed to the side, treated almost like a footnote to Impressionism and Post-Impressionism, when really I think what they were doing was its own thing entirely. And honestly, I see myself in both of them in different ways, and I want to talk through why. It's worth saying up front, this isn't just my opinion about them being underrated. Even Matisse, who knew Bonnard personally, once called him the greatest painter among all of them. And Bonnard still spent decades being treated as a kind of footnote. So if Matisse couldn't fix that reputation problem, I'm not under any illusion that one video will either. But I still want to make the case because I think the reason they get overlooked is actually the same reason they're worth studying closely. Both of them get filed under the term Intimism, painters of the interior, domestic, the quiet moment, and I think that label, as accurate as it is also exactly what makes people walk past their work in a museum. There's no mythology, no battle scene, no dramatic lighting, no obvious spectacle pulling your eye in from across the room. Just a room, a table, a woman at her toilet, and if you're moving fast, it's easy to read that as minor. Let's start with Vuillard. The first time I really sat with his work, what hit me wasn't the subject matter, it was the texture. The way color sits on a canvas in these dense, almost woven patches. Vuillard didn't paint a room the way a camera would record it, he built it, patch by patch, color by color, almost like he was constructing a map of a space rather than copying it. That word, the map, is the best way I can describe what I see in his pictures. If you look closely, you can see how he treats wallpaper, a fabric, a tablecloth, a dress, almost the same way he treats a face or a hand. Everything gets the same weight. Nothing is more important just because it's a person and not a pattern. And that flattens the image in this strange, beautiful way where the whole canvas becomes one continuous surface of color decisions. I find that incredibly close to how I think when I'm building a painting. I'm not trying to make one part more real than another. I'm placing areas of color and texture next to each other and trusting that the relationships between them will create the feeling, not any single brushstroke. There's something else about Vuillard that I relate to, and it's harder to put into words. He feels introverted to me. Not withdrawn, not cold, but quiet, interior. A lot of his work is literally set inside rooms, domestic scenes, his mother's apartment, dressing tables, intimate corners of a home that nobody else was really looking at closely. He wasn't painting grand public statements. He was painting the texture of staying in. And I think there's a kind of courage in that, actually, choosing to make the quiet, ordinary moments the entire subject of a painting, rather than treating them as a filler before something bigger happens. I work the same way in a sense. My subjects are usually quiet too, a portrait, a moment, something domestic, something small in scale even when the canvas itself is large. But the intensity goes into how it's built, not how loud the subject is. Before I move to Bonnard, I want to mention one thing about their friendship, because it tells you something about both of them. They met as students, joined the same small group of painters who call themselves the Nabis, and at one point actually shared the studio together early in their careers. They stayed close for decades. There's even a story about Bonnard convincing Vuillard to distract a museum guard so he could sneak up on a painting he'd already sold and touch up the color, because he'd mixed a new shade back in his studio that he thought worked better. That's such a Bonnard thing to do and such a Vuillard thing to go along with. It tells you these weren't two strangers who happened to paint in a similar mode, they were genuinely entangled with each other's way of seeing for most of their lives. Now, Bonnard is a different animal, even though they're almost always mentioned in the same breath, and even though they were close friends who shared a studio early on, what gets me with Bonnard is the color. Not just that it's beautiful, although it is, but a specific kind of beautiful it is. Soft, pastel, almost dissolving at the edges sometimes. But underneath that softness, there's an intensity that never actually lets up. He's not a calm painter pretending to be loud, he's a loud painter wearing a calm coat. I think that's the best way I can put it. A quiet force, a subdued intensity, the subjects in a lot of his work are about as gentle as it gets. A breakfast table, a bathtub, a window looking out at a garden. Nothing dramatic is happening in any of these scenes on the surface. But the color underneath them is doing something far from gentle. It's vibrating, it's almost arguing with itself, pink against green, yellow against violet. and somehow it still resolves into something that feels warm and content rather than chaotic. And here's the part that really connects to how I think about my own work. Bonnard mostly painted from memory, not life. He'd look at something, sit with it, let it sit with him, and then go back to the studio and paint it days or weeks later, filter through whatever his memory kept and exaggerate it. That's not documentation, that's interpretation with a delay built into it. And I think that delay is exactly where the intensity comes from. You don't remember the literal color of a tablecloth. You remember the feeling of that morning, and the color becomes whatever the feeling needs it to be. His wife Marthe shows up in his work hundreds of times, in the bath, at her dressing table, just existing in a room. And what's strange is, even after she died, he kept painting her entirely from memory, for years afterward, as if she'd never left the scene. That's how strong this memory-based method was for him. It wasn't a technique he used because he forgot details. It was the entire point. The painting was never trying to be the room. It was trying to be what the room felt like, held at a distance after time had already started reshaping it. There's a vision of this that goes beyond just Bonnard too. Alex Katz painted his wife Ada 250 times across 60 years of marriage. One subject he returned to again and again, not because he ran out of things to paint, but because that one relationship kept giving him something new every time. I've painted Alina well over 15 times now, paintings and drawings combined, and I understand that pull completely. Some subjects don't get used up, they just keep opening. That's basically how I work too. I treat fairly calm, ordinary subjects, but I push the intensity hard, in color, in texture, and in how saturated things get. Subdued subject matter, anything but a subdued treatment of it. I think that's the true line between me and both of these painters, even though their solutions to it look completely different from each other. I'll be specific about this because I think it's the part people relate to most. My own process starts with a photograph, a real moment, usually something domestic, something close to me, sometimes a cat curled up somewhere it shouldn't be. By the time that photograph turns into a painting, it's gone through digital collage, sometimes AI-generated bits if I aim for something specific I couldn't find anywhere else, color unification, and then a long stretch of decisions made at the easel that have nothing to do with what the camera actually recorded. That's not so different from Bonnard letting a memory drift for 2 weeks before he touches a canvas. The reference is a starting point, not a destination. What ends up on a canvas is whatever the feeling needed, not whatever the lens captured. Vuillard solves it to density, through pattern stacked against pattern until the whole canvas hums with information. Bonnard solves it through color pushed just past where it's comfortable, dressed up in a palette so pleasant you almost don't notice how hard it's working. I don't think I land cleanly on either side. Some days I want the woven patchwork density of Vuillard, other days I want that pink and green argument that Bonnard does so well. But what I take from both of them every single time is permission. Permission to treat an ordinary domestic moment as worthy of that much intensity. Permission to let the color do the emotional labor instead of the subject matter doing it for you. Their subjects don't shout for attention, no dramatic mythology, no grand historical scene, no obvious spectacle, just a room, a table, a woman getting dressed, a cat curled up somewhere in the corner of a domestic afternoon. It's easy to walk past that in a museum if you're looking for fireworks. But if you slow down, the fireworks are there. They're just happening in the color, not in the subject. So if you've never spent real time with either of these two, that's my suggestion for the week. Don't just glance at a Vuillard interior or a Bonnard breakfast table. Stand with it. Look at how the color is actually built, patch by patch, or pushed just past comfortable. I think you'll start to see why I keep coming back to both of them, even now, years into my work. If you've got a painter you think gets overlooked the same way, tell me in the comments. I'd love to go take a look at their work. I send updates about my work in my studio letter, the link is below. You'll get a free insight into my sketching practice as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.